say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us begin today by acknowledging a great friend of this institution, Mrs. Heather Foley. Mrs. Foley, thank you for giving us this chance to try to express the debt of gratitude that we owe to Tom. An English poet once wrote, "The noblest work of God is an honest man." Well, Tom Foley was that and more. A leader grounded in decency and principle. He brought honor to himself, to his family, and to this house. And he did all these things a public servant should do, and frankly, did many of them better than the rest. Ask any of his peers and they'll tell you this, especially those who didn't share his politics. Listen to Bob Dole, who around the time Tom became Speaker called him a man of total integrity. Or ask Alan Simpson, who said, Tom, I can tell you to go to hell and make you feel good about going there. And Henry Hyde, as fierce a conservative as they come, who said of the man, I wish he were a Republican. There's also this from President George H.W. Bush. Tom Foley represented the very best in public service and our political system. One class act tipping his hat to another. Yes, the span of Tom's service and his record is impressive, as is the sequence of his rise. Ag Committee Chairman, Majority Whip, Majority Leader, and Speaker. But it was his sense of fairness, his port in a storm bearing that will always stand out for me. It's how he held this institution together at a very difficult time. And it's why those who come after us, who seek to know what it means when we use that phrase, man of the house, or just what it means to leave something behind, should look up the name Thomas S. Foley. Today we gather in the Old Hall, joined by presidents, vice presidents, speakers, so many of of our colleagues and diplomats that Tom served with, and to reminisce about this man's service and a toast to his life. Welcome, and thank you all for being here.
Let us pray. God of heaven and earth, the work of your hands is made known in your bountiful creation and in the lives of those who faithfully live in your grace. Today we especially remember the life and work of Tom Foley, son of the very proud city of Spokane. His commitment to furthering education in his own district, Washington's 5th, is testified to by the Ralph and Helen Higgins Foley Library at Gonzaga University, his alma mater. It is named in honor of his parents, who clearly did something right in raising such a son. Tom Foley was a modest man whose impact on the public weal beyond his district far exceeded any projection of ego strength. May we all be inspired by his example to be men and women impelled to improve the lives and prospects of our fellow citizens, while eschewing any honor or glory for ourselves. And as he did, do our part to increase understanding and respect across cultural divides. Be present with us this day, O God, as we mark his life and remember his legacy. Bless this gathering and comfort us as we comfort one another in remembering a great American and a genuinely good man. Amen.
Tom Foley was my friend, mentor, and colleague in the House of Representatives. I first met Tom Foley at the University of Washington Law School in 1965 during his freshman term. He was a brilliant young man with a warm and friendly smile. It was his intellect and love for this country that made him an outstanding leader. He served as chairman of the House Agriculture Committee and worked hard on the Farm Bill and food stamp legislation. Bringing these two issues together allowed Chairman Foley to build support in the House for both. Tom believed in and practiced civility and bipartisanship. His view was that after the elections were over, Democrats and Republicans should work together to deal with the national legislative agenda. Seeing Tom Foley's strong leadership qualities and belief in getting things done for the American people, Speaker O'Neill appointed Tom to be the majority whip. He was then unanimously elected to be our majority leader and then our speaker in 1989. As speaker, Tom worked closely with Bob Michel, the Republican leader, from 1989 to 1995. They remained great friends after they left Congress. Later, President Clinton named Speaker Foley to be our ambassador to Japan. As a staffer to Senator Warren G. Magnuson, I worked with Tom on the Spokane's World's Fair in 1974. This project created dramatic change for Spokane, the largest city in the 5th District. Tom was so proud to represent the people of the 5th Congressional District for 30 years. He always thought this was his most important responsibility. It was a great honor for me that Tom Foley supported me in my campaign for Congress in 1976. I was then privileged to work with him and to receive his support as a member of the House. And I will always thank him for being such a good mentor. We will always remember the legacy of Tom Foley. He believed in the Congress, and he believed that this institution could produce positive results for the American people. His loving wife, Heather, supported him throughout his career and took wonderful care of him during his long illness. May God bless you, Heather, and the entire Foley family.
I'm a House member 7th Congressional District, which is mostly Seattle. I knew Tom Foley for more than 40 years, and throughout that time he was a wonderful friend and a sage mentor. In 1971, when I was a freshman state legislator, he took me out to dinner in Seattle and suggested I run for Congress. I was pleased by his regard for my career, but I knew better since I was a freshman legislator. So I rejected it, ran for governor. I got creamed. Tom never said a word. Chastened, I returned to the legislature, determined to learn as much as I could about the realities of governing effectively and the challenges of legislating well. When I finally ran for Congress in 1988, Tom was majority leader of the House. As I arrived for his first term in 1989, Tom was about to become Speaker. I know now that he was about to become the last Speaker of the whole House. He believed that the Speaker was the Speaker for the whole House, and he lived that to his very core. Today, many will note Tom's devotion to the House of Representatives and his learned knowledge of the history of this organization. Sitting down with Tom and letting him tell stories, you learned enormous amounts. He appreciated the role of the House in our balanced structure of government. He knew well the challenge of maintaining that fragile balance. So when he assumed the speakership, he brought to it a scholar's depth of understanding and a disciple's passion. He led the House with fairness and comedy, a style of leadership we haven't seen. We recently have looked for it, but we have not seen what Tom was able to do with both sides. Tom understood that the House could not perform its constitutional function without even-handedness and respected the role of the minority. Tom was a Democrat, no question about it. He was very clear about why he was a Democrat. He believed in the legitimacy and the value of government. He knew that government's duty was to improve the lives of Americans, and he saw it as a noble obligation and worthy of one's very best efforts at any time. When he was Speaker, he abandoned none of these principles. He added to them a very nuanced appreciation of the role of Speaker and his certainty that the leadership of the House required not a flame-throwing partisan, but a measured, steady pilot, enlightened by an unmatched knowledge of and love for the House of Representatives. Tom Foley's district was a sprawling, largely rural swath of eastern Washington, yet his essentially very conservative voters re-elected him for 30 years. They took an urban internationalist and sent him back again and again. They did so, and that was a persistent reaffirmation of his unshakable integrity, his superb legislative skills, and his deep connection with the people of the
minister, scholar, and abolitionist who lived in New England in the 19th century. His name was James Freeman Clark, and he once made this statement. A politician, he said, thinks only of the next election. A statesman thinks of the next generation. Speaker Tom Foley was a true statesman. He believed it was an honor to serve the public good, and he brought respect for the dignity of our democracy and the inspiration of our mandate of the nation to every moment of his service. He believed it was our calling as members of Congress to do what we could to preserve and help create a more perfect union that has been in the making for almost 300 years. In all of my years, knowing Speaker Foley and seeing him on the floor or in small meeting, I never heard this good man, speak or say a bad word about anything. I just have a feeling that he was one who believed if you couldn't say something good about someone, don't say anything at all. As a leader, he believed he should build and not tear down, reconcile and not divide. He stood for the principles of diplomacy and mutual respect, even toward his opposition. He did not subscribe to the politics of personal destruction. He knew that his work as Speaker, as a representative of the great state of Washington, or as a legislator, was bigger than his own personal values and ambition. He wanted to leave a record of accomplishment that would have a lasting impact on our society for generations to come. When he left the Speaker's chair, it was the end of an era, a period in our history. Maybe, just maybe, his passing at this moment in our history is just as eloquent reminder of one simple truth. No leader is greater than the cause he serves, and when our lives are over, we will be remembered, not for fame or fortune, but for how we help or how we harm the dignity of all humankind. I will never forget this prince of a man who led by example and struggled to turn the tide of partisanship in Congress back to constructive debate on the great issues. Every leader, whether in politics or in the larger society, but every leader in America would do well to take a page from Tom Foley's book.
Heather, Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, Mr. Vice President, how wonderful that Speaker Foley has two presidents, two vice presidents, and the good wishes of President George Herbert Walker Bush that our distinguished speaker quoted earlier. He could never probably have imagined that when he came to the floor on the first day to make his first floor speech. He said, "Public service is a free gift of a free people and a challenge for all of us in public life to do what we can to make our service useful for those who have sent us here. Few fulfilled that charge with more courage, more conviction, more civility than he." I take great pride in the fact that he's the first speaker to hail from west of the Rocky Mountains. He brought to Congress a fresh perspective and a powerful voice that would open doors of leadership to members who represent the diversity of our country. His first campaign was legendary in its ability. Before the election was even over, his opponent, Congressman Walt Horan, released a statement calling the campaign the cleanest he had ever seen in his 22 years.
You hear that big dog sing?
In that spirit, when Tom Foley came to Congress and as Speaker, he made campaign finance reform a priority and led legislation to the President's desk to ensure that our democracy was a government of, by, and for the people. Unfortunately, we could not override the President's veto, but Speaker Foley's commitment to a just democracy and fair elections serves us as an enduring challenge today. Known for his ability to build consensus, Speaker Foley never compromised on the conviction to do right by the American people. When tragedy struck at the Fairchild Air Force Base Hospital in his district, this long-time defender of gun rights saw the need for sensible gun violence prevention laws. Speaker Foley brought that bill to the floor. He helped enact it, those bans, knowing that it would not be well received in his district. But he did what he believed, and he did it with courage. He matched that dedication to principle and courage with a gift for diplomacy. Nearly 20 years ago, I was privileged, I don't know why I was on the list, but I was invited to attend a special dinner at the British Embassy to honor Speaker Foley for his leadership. As fate would have it, President Clinton, that was the day that you announced that you were going to grant a temporary visa to Jerry Adams. Just a coincidence. Needless to say, the mood of the evening was tense. Speaker Foley, with his characteristic grace, reasoned that this step, no matter how disconcerting at the moment to them, was crucial to delivering an ever-elusive peace to Northern Ireland. That remarkable ability to build bridges across great divides would serve him as well as Speaker and later as U.S. Ambassador to Japan, something he took great pride in, as I know you did, Mr. Vice President. His judgment was impeccable and was respected, and many of us benefited from it. For me, in September 2008, I attended a G8 meeting of heads of parliaments, or speakers, whatever they're called in your particular country. All of the participants were invited to lay a wreath at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial. I immediately called Ambassador Foley, as I called Vice President Mondale, to ask what I should do. He replied, "You must participate. You will be the highest-ranking American official, up until then, to lay a wreath at the memorial. You cannot say no." Now, that may seem easy now, but at the time, that was very strong judgment that, as again, the Vice President also gave me. Such is the nature of a great man who believed above all for the purpose of public service. It's about respect. Diplomat, leader, speaker, Tom Foley was the quintessential champion of the common good. He spoke for the house he led and the country he so loved. In his farewell speech, I started with his opening speech. In his farewell speech to the House, he said, "Congress is the place where we come together to speak the voices of America and democracy, and it is the voice that is found to echo resoundingly throughout the world." Throughout the world. Heather, I hope it is a comfort to you that so many people mourn your loss throughout the world and are praying for you at this sad time. To you, Heather, to the Foley family, thank you for sharing Tom with a grateful nation. His voice will forever echo in our hearts to all who strive to make a difference through public service. As we count our blessings as a nation, we know that God truly blessed America with the life and leadership of Speaker, Ambassador, Leader Tom Foley.
Thank you all for being here. And Heather, we honor you today. You were there all along, guiding and accompanying Tom across all the peaks and the valleys, right to the end. We thank you for your spirit, your generosity, and your example, which enlivened this house, as well as your own, for many years. Welcome back. Now, given Tom's famous equanimity, it is somewhat ironic that he decided to run for Congress in the first place. He actually did it in a moment of anger. The day was July the 16th, 1964. The Beatles had just returned to Liverpool after their first U.S. tour. President Johnson had recently signed the Civil Rights Act and was on his way to a landslide victory against Barry Goldwater that November. And a 35-year-old Tom Foley was having lunch at the Spokane Club in downtown Spokane.
a gifted lawyer from a prominent local family and a trusted aide to Scoop Jackson. Tom mentioned to the guys he was eating lunch with that he was thinking seriously about running for Congress, not this time, but the next time around. At which point one of his lunch companions bluntly dismissed the idea out of hand, said, "You'll never do it. You're like all young people. You think the party's going to come to you with a Tiffany tray and an engraved card and say, 'Please, we humbly beg you, run for Congress.' And that isn't the way it happens. People get to Congress by wanting to run for Congress. You've got excuses this year, and you'll have excuses next year, and the year after that." Well, Tom didn't like this little piece of armchair psychology one bit, and he was determined to prove them wrong. So he got up from the table, walked over to the library across the hall, stuffed himself into a phone booth, and called Western Union. Within minutes, a telegram had been sent to Senator Jackson back in Washington saying that Tom had just resigned his job and was headed to Olympia to file for a run. Then Tom called his bank and found out he didn't have any money. His cousin Hank had to loan him the filing fee. Oh, and the filing deadline was the next day. So Tom had no cash, no plan, and virtually no time. But he had the smarts. He had a sterling reputation. He had the backing of Senator Jackson, and now he had the motivation. And he did it. And for the next 3 decades, Thomas Stevens Foley would devote his life to the people of Eastern Washington's 5th Congressional District with grace, intelligence, wit, and a profound respect for others, including his political adversaries, and an abiding gratitude for the trust and confidence of the people he was elected to serve. From Walla Walla to Northport and all the wheat country and timber towns in between. Tom always looked the part. Even his classmates at Gonzaga High School called him the senator. And I dare say that if most Americans were asked to conjure up in their minds the image of a congressman, the man they'd like to see would be him. To most people, it seemed as though Tom were born to serve here, and in a remarkable 30-year congressional career, he proved they were right. He proved that he didn't just look the part, he knew the part, and he played it well. Tom and I weren't on the same side on most issues. His faith in government was, shall I say, a little more robust than mine. But we shared a deep respect for the institution and a belief that working with the other side, particularly at a time of divided government, is no heresy when it enables you to achieve some good for the nation. That kind of comedy is sometimes viewed as old-fashioned around here, but that's never been true. The parties have always disagreed, but it hasn't kept them from working together from time to time to solve problems that we all recognize. Tom knew that. He practiced it. He took flack from time to time for being a little too friendly with Republicans, but I don't think he ever doubted the wisdom of his approach, even in defeat. As Tom often said, the first vote you need to earn is your own. It was a principle that served him very well. And it's one that I think says a lot about what the legacy of the gentleman from Spokane will be. We honor his service and his memory. May we draw all the right lessons from both.
For 4 years I served in the House of Representatives with Speaker Tom Foley. During the time I served there, he was majority whip. I also served with the man who would succeed Speaker Foley as leader of the House, Speaker Newt Gingrich. Newt and I don't agree on too much. But when he wrote in last week's Time magazine that Tom Foley was a pragmatic man, a person of great integrity, and a genuine patriot, I couldn't have agreed more with Newt. This is what Speaker Gingrich wrote, and I quote, "I have nothing but fond memories of serving with Tom Foley. We worked together when we could, competed when we had to, and cooperated for the national interest as far as possible." Close quote. I too have fond memories of my time serving the House with Tom Foley. I offer my condolences to Heather, who, as we all know, had a strong voice in one on the House, at least when I was there. She was tremendous, always there, available to help us. And she was his greatest influence politically in his whole life. Tom learned his practical style of politics from his mentors, Senator Scoop Jackson and Warren Magnuson, who are both from the state of Washington. Speaker Foley gained his pragmatism from being a member, as we've heard from Norm Dick and others, as a member and then chairman of the House Agriculture Committee, one of the Chamber's most bipartisan committees. But I credit much of Tom's down-to-earth demeanor to his Western upbringing. You see, he was the first Speaker to the House of Representatives to be born west of the Rocky Mountains. He cut an imposing figure. He was a big man physically, had this wonderful smile and great voice. He was always gracious to young members like me. One day, I reflect back, as we get a little older, and we've all had that experience, or most of us, you can't see like you used to. And somehow he didn't bring his reading glasses with him, and he was desperate. He had to read there. He was managing what was going on the floor, and he couldn't see. So I was the first person he saw. He said, "Find me some glasses, I don't care where you get them." And I wanted to adhere to his wishes, so I didn't care where I got them. Somebody left them laying on a desk, and I grabbed them. And he was so happy to get those glasses, because as it's happened to all of us, he just couldn't see, and he needed to see. Well, it was my honor and pleasure to find him some glasses to help him see that day. But a vision's where the country needed to go. He always saw clearly.
Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm has borne the restless wave, who bids the mighty ocean deep its own appointed limits keep. Oh, hear us when we cry to thee.
members of the family, President Clinton, Obama, and all my former colleagues, and friends of Tom, all of you. It was my good fortune to have visited Tom with my former right-hand man, Billy Pitts, a few days before Tom died. I'm so grateful, Heather, for making that visit possible. We thought it was going to be just a visit of a couple minutes. And it ended up, we were speaking for an hour about the days gone by. Not unlike so many others we had over a relationship of more than 40 years. We both were able to say our piece in an atmosphere of mutual respect, open-mindedness, and most of all, trust. As I said in an article in the Post the other day, when Tom became Speaker, he suggested that we get together once a week, talk over the affairs of the House, 1 week in my office and the next in his, something that had never been done before. While we disagreed over policy and jousted with each other politically, the meetings were highly productive because underlying them was the faith and trust we had in each other. We could talk about anything, knowing that our discussions would remain private unless we decided otherwise. I don't think there is anything more important in the relationship between political leaders than trust. Never was that bond tested more than it was in January 1991 when I implored Tom to bring to the House floor a resolution that Steve Solars of New York and I had introduced, authorizing the then President Bush to engage in military action in Operation Desert Storm to drive Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. I was convinced that Tom opposed military intervention, and I know that a good many of his caucus were strongly opposed as well. It was an exercise of political courage and personal decency for Tom to agree to bring the resolution up for an open debate and recorded vote under those circumstances. But he did. We had one of the most spirited but civil and informative debates in which I had been privileged to participate in all my 38 years in Congress. We prevailed in the final outcome that day, but I would have been proud of the House and proud of our Speaker regardless, because the House demonstrated to the world that it was truly a deliberative and democratic body. Tom and I always struggled to find common ground between our two sides. When there were issues upon which we could not agree, we could at least use common courtesy in the way we conducted our politics. That isn't just good manners, it's good politics. But win, lose, or compromise, the way we argue can be as important in the long run as the decisions we reach. I so admired Tom's grace and civility. I also admired his understanding and natural culture of the institution. He was so dedicated to its preservation and protection. Tom was chosen to lead the House in a very difficult time. Through it all, he was a gentleman of the House and a fair and honest broker and a worthy adversary. And maybe we both knew that our days were numbered. We were too conditioned by our personal and political upbringing to assume that we had the market cornered on political principle or partisan superiority. We knew, too, that there would always be a distinction and separation between campaigning for office and serving in office. We were, I guess, pupils of the old school. Tom knew that a House member has 3 essential jobs: to deliberate, to debate, and to be effective. He knew that if we wanted to be effective in the House, you just can't go around shouting your principles you have to subject those principles to the test of open debate against those who do not share those principles. But true debate is not possible unless the golden rule is applied, which simply means that you treat your fellow members the way you yourself want to be treated. Tom believed in that rule, and he practiced it from the day he came to the House and all during his time as Speaker of the House. Tom Foley was proud to be a member of this House. I share that deep pride in this great institution, and I guess that is one reason we were able to work together. We both saw the House of Representatives not as a necessary evil, but as one of the great creations of a free people. On our last days in Congress, on November 29th, 1994, Tom did me the great honor of inviting me to the Speaker's podium to preside over the House while he gave his farewell remarks from the well. Incidentally, that was the first time in 40 years a Republican had been on that rostrum. When we stood side by side at the podium on that last day of the 103rd Congress, we knew that we were icons, I guess, of a bygone era. As we visited for the last time, 20 years later, I think we felt good about that. We both took great pride in knowing we had made things happen, that we found good ways to solve difficult problems and make the House a working institution. Now, Tom takes his place among the great public servants immortalized in this hall of statues. He is most worthy of a presence here. I know because of his great love for this institution that his spirit will dwell here forever. I only hope that the legislators who now walk through here each day, so consumed by the here and now, will feel his spirit, learn from it, and be humbled by it. That's what I have to say in honor of my dear friend, Tom Foley.
Mr. Michael may be 90 years old, but he has the spirit of a man half his age and the wisdom of one 10 times his age. We thank him for those remarks. Heather, I thank you, and Mr. Speaker, I thank you for giving those of us who worked with, knew, and cared about Tom the chance to be here today. I thank you for Heather for all you did to make his work possible and better. Mr. President, thank you for being here, and Mr. Vice President Mondale, and all the others who have spoken before me. Shortly after I was elected president, I invited Speaker Foley and Leader Gebhardt to come to Arkansas to see me, to tell me everything I didn't know that was about to happen to me, which Tom Foley proceeded to do in that calm, restrained, balanced, lyrical way. He told me not to be lulled by Bob Michaels'
friendliness that he was a very tough adversary, but I could make a deal with it. He told me not to be intimidated, Mr. Speaker, by your bellicosity, because you were a brilliant politician, but at the end we would find a way to do business. He turned out to be right about both things. His leadership made possible things that matter to me a lot. Being president is a matter of trying to do what you promised to do when you ran, trying to respond to the legitimate impulses that are coming out of the political system across the range, and trying to deal with the unanticipated developments. And if you ignore any of them, you cannot prevail. And if you can't work with the Congress, it's very difficult. Tom Foley, therefore, was pivotal in our landslide victory for my economic plan and deficit reduction package. We won by 1 vote in the House. That runaway victory was made possible by the Speaker and everybody else that voted for it. But also, we just celebrated the 20th anniversary of the Family and Medical Leave Law, 20th anniversary of AmeriCorps. They are now part of the pillars of our sense of common citizenship. I've had Republicans and Democrats come up to me and tell me what a difference the family leave law made for them. Young people who belong to both political parties who believed in citizen service and participated in AmeriCorps. He helped make those things possible too. And one of the things that I always appreciated about him and marveled was how he could be brutally honest in the kindest way. It is true, as Leader Pelosi said, that he had had a conversion of sorts on the whole question of assault weapons, and because of an experience he had, but he was very clear-headed. He told me when we succeeded, in no small measure thanks to the leadership of then Senator Biden, and putting the assault weapons ban back into the crime bill, he said, you can leave this in here, but there will be a lot of blood on the floor if we pass this. Many of us will not survive. And I'll never forget the argument I had. I said, Tom, I'm from Arkansas. Both my senators voted for this. I'm still going to carry it next time. He said, yeah. He said, in 4 years, it's the same thing with your economic plan. People will see that it works, and people will see that they didn't lose their guns and they still got to defend their homes and go hunting and be in sports shooting contests. But we'll all have to run before they know any of that. We have enough uncertainty now. If you put this in there, there'll be a lot of carnage. And I thought he was wrong, but he was right. And he lost that election by 4,000 votes. I'd be a wealthy man if I had $1 for every time in the last 20 years I have found my mind drawn to that conversation. Was it worth his public service? We had 8 years of declining violent crime for the first time in the history of the country. We did prove that this didn't interfere with people's Second Amendment rights. But the price was high. What I want to tell you is, appropriate today, is that Tom Foley, as nice as he was, as civil as he was, as much as he loved his colleagues of both parties, was one tough guy. This is a man who took up martial arts in his 60s. Now that I am there, I respect it even more. He risked the broken bones and the torn ligaments and everything. He was tough. And he walked clear-eyed into the House, and we put those votes together, and the crime bill passed. And those of us who supported it at least think America was much better off as a result. But he knew that even when the spirit of bipartisanship and compromise, being in public service and making difficult decisions was inevitable and not free. And he paid the price. Before I came here, I read all the letters that Tom Foley and I wrote to each other. That's a great thing about having a library. Somebody will dig that stuff up. Now, here's the one that means the most to me. It says the most about him. He loved being